Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Volume 1, Crusades prior to the rise of the Ayyubid state. Start of Part 5 of Chapter 3. Najm ibn Ilghazi, ruler of Mardin. The Islamic Jihad movement against the Crusaders was strongly connected to the leaders of Mosul, who were under Seljuk rule. The death of the Sultan Muhammad ibn Malik Shah in 512 Hijri, that is 1117 Common Era, led to the decline of the Seljuk position in Iraq. Sultan Mahmud ibn Muhammad ibn Malik Shah tried to summon Ager from Mosul in order to appoint him as governor of Shahankiah in Baghdad, which led to Mosul temporarily losing its leading position in reviving the Islamic Jihad movement against the Crusaders. Leadership of the Jihad passed to Najm ibn Ilghazi, the ruler of Mardin. Ilghazi started his jihad efforts by capturing Aleppo in 511 Hijri, that is 1117 Common Era, because of its importance to any military or political leader who wanted to confront the Crusaders due to its vital strategic position in terms of human resources and military, political and economic aspects. Aleppo lay between two Crusader kingdoms, Edessa and Antioch. At the same time, it was able to establish contact with the Turkmen Muslim forces who were spread throughout the Mesopotamian region. Hence, capturing Aleppo opens the way to leading the jihad movement, and that is indeed what happened in the case of Najm ibn Ilghazi and his nephew Balak ibn Bahram, and after them Ager al-Bursuki and Imad ad-Din Zangi, and Nur ad-Din Mahmud later on. As for the details of Najm ibn Ilghazi's capture of Aleppo in 511 Hijri, that is 1117 Common Era, new developments took place which made the Crusaders hope to capture the city when it reached such a point of weakness and economic hardship that the people were unable even to feed their animals. However, its people's fear of falling into Crusader hands forced them to summon Najm ibn Ilghazi and surrender Aleppo to him in that year. Ilghazi started his work in Aleppo by imposing his authority on some regions that belonged to it, such as Beilis, and by detaining some of the men of Aleppo in order to get money to help him make a truce with the Crusaders. The people and soldiers of Aleppo disliked him according to Ibn al-Adim, which forced him to leave the city and go to Mardin after leaving his son Husam ad-Din Timurtash in charge of Aleppo. The troops stationed in Beilis took advantage of the high prices that they were faced within the same year, 511 Hijri, that is 1117 Common Era, and sent word to the Crusaders that they would hand the city over to them. So Ilghazi was forced to return to Aleppo at the head of a Turkmen force. When the Crusaders realized the danger, they withdrew and Ilghazi recaptured it and went back to Mardin after working out a truce with them, according to which neither side would transgress against the possessions of the other. The Crusaders break the truce. The Crusaders found their opportunity after Ilghazi left, however, and they raided Azaz and intensified their siege until the Muslims in the city were forced to surrender. The people of Aleppo were forced to make contact with the Crusaders to ask them to adhere to the truce that Ilghazi had made with them, to hand Tel Hirak over to them, and to pay the agreed upon amount for 4 months, which was 1,000 dinars, and they would have the north and west of Aleppo. Najm ad-Din Ilghazi grew angry when the news from Aleppo reached him, but he could not return and save it because he had too few troops. So he headed towards eastern Mesopotamia with the aim of gathering troops. At the same time, he told Tahir ad-Din Tughtagin of his wish to meet with him in 512 Hijri, that is 1118 Common Era, and they met at the citadel of Dosar with the aim of pushing the Crusaders back from Aleppo. They did not manage to do that, but it prompted the Crusaders to impose tight controls on the entrances to Aleppo after taking over Bazara. The situation in Aleppo deteriorated to the point of devastation according to Ibn al-Adim. So the people of Aleppo had no choice but to seek help from the Abbasid Caliphate and the Seljuk state in Baghdad. They received no help though, because the Abbasid Caliphate was too weak, and the Seljuks were preoccupied with family conflicts amongst themselves. Mobilization against the Crusaders. Najm ad-Din Ilghazi did not manage to meet the Crusaders. Ilghazi left Tughtagin and went back to Mardin in order to gather troops in preparation for a renewed jihad, intending to meet with the Crusaders in a decisive battle. In Mardin, Najm ad-Din Ilghazi gathered more than 20,000 Turkmen, with the aim of fighting the Crusaders who had intensified their siege of Aleppo, which had almost run out of supplies. Ilghazi sent his messengers to Baghdad to announce this mobilization against the Crusaders and to inform the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustarshid Billah and the Seljuk Sultan Mahmud ibn Muhammad ibn Malik Shah of what the Crusaders had done in Mesopotamia, taking possession of a citadel near Edessa and killing its ruler Ibn Utair. Najm ad-Din Ilghazi made arrangements with Tahir ad-Din Tughtagin in 512 Hijri, that is 1118 Common Era, to meet the Crusaders in Syria, in Safar of the following year, 513 Hijri, that is 1119 Common Era. Before the appointed time, Ilghazi headed towards Edessa and besieged it fiercely, which forced the Crusaders in the city to ask him for a peace deal, offering to give him in return some of the Muslim prisoners who were being held there. Ilghazi responded to them and stipulated that they should not go to the aid of the king of Antioch in the event of any fighting with him, and they agreed. This was a sound step on Ilghazi's part, through which he was able to isolate one of the Crusader forces and prevent it from helping the other forces. This giving in to the Muslim rulers' demands is a clear indication of the weakness of the Crusaders in Mesopotamia. The Battle of Ager Sanguinis, the Field of Blood. After Ilghazi had ascertained that he would not be exposed to Crusader attack from the rear, he headed towards Syria and was joined by Usama ibn al-Mubarak ibn Shibl al-Kilabi and the Emir Tughan Arsalan, the ruler of Badlis Warzan. He continued his march until he drew close to Al-Atharib in the land of Sarmada in the spring of 513 Hijri, that is 1119 Common Era. There he awaited the arrival of Tahir ad-Din Tughtagin. The Crusaders, led by Roger the ruler of Antioch, had camped in Tel Afrin where they began to build a fortress. It never occurred to them that Najm ad-Din Ilghazi would take them by surprise in that place, because the road was narrow, and because they thought that the Muslims would attack Al-Atharib or Zardana. So they were overconfident and thought that they were well fortified. They sent word to Ilghazi saying, "Do not trouble yourself to come to us. We will come to you." When Ilghazi felt he had waited too long for the arrival of his ally, he responded to the wishes of his commanders who were with him, and hastened to take the Crusaders by surprise. The Crusaders did not notice anything until the banners of the Muslims suddenly appeared and surrounded them on all sides. That occurred on Friday 16th Rabiul Awwal, 513 Hijri, that is 1119 Common Era. The Qadi of Aleppo, Abul Fadl ibn al-Kashhab, went out and delivered a very eloquent speech to the Muslims, urging them to engage in jihad, and the Muslims attacked the Crusaders as one from all directions. Arrows rained down on the Crusaders like locusts, while swords were striking them from all directions. None escaped but a few, the rest were killed or wounded. Among the slain was Roger of Antioch, who had hastened to meet the Muslims in battle before his reinforcements from Jerusalem, Tripoli, and elsewhere arrived. Over 70 Crusader knights and commanders were taken captive. They tried to ransom themselves with more than 300,000 dinars, but Najm ad-Din Ilghazi did not accept it from them. He ordered that they all be killed. This battle is known to medieval European, the Latin historians, and the modern historians who quote them as the Field of Blood, because so many Crusaders were killed there, and only a few Muslims were killed. Consequences of the victory. The importance of what happened to the Crusaders does not stop with the military victory that Najm ad-Din Ilghazi achieved over them. Rather, this victory resulted in the establishment of a united Islamic front, which included Muslim emirs in Syria and Mesopotamia. In addition, it made Aleppo safe from Crusader danger, especially after Najm ad-Din Ilghazi captured a fortress close to Al-Atarib in the same year. Overall, it was a huge disaster, which deprived Antioch of its ruler and its army, which made the Syriacs and Armenians in Antioch rethink their position of supporting the Crusaders. This, it appears, is what prompted them to conspire to get rid of the Western Crusaders later on. Ibn al-Adhim states that after the battle ended, Najm ad-Din Ilghazi went to Roger's tent so that the Muslims could give him all the booty that they had acquired. But he returned all the booty to the fighters and did not take anything from them except some weapons that he kept for the Muslim monarchs in order to revive in their hearts the love of Islamic jihad against the Crusaders. Al-Ghazi managed to achieve a series of victories in northern Syria, which created for the Muslims an atmosphere of calm and stability. The Muslims managed to inflict a crushing defeat on the Crusader reinforcements which came, led by Baldwin, king of Jerusalem, to save Roger. Nonetheless, Najm ad-Din Ilghazi was not content with that. He met in Artah with his ally Toghtagin, and they agreed to attack Al-Atarib and Zardana. They managed to capture both locations from the Crusaders. Al-Ghazi then went to Danith with a small group of Muslims, where he met Baldwin and Robert, ruler of Zardana. A battle took place between the two sides in Jamadul Awwal, 513 Hijri, that is 1119 Common Era, which resulted in victory for Najm ad-Din Ilghazi and defeat for the Crusaders, who sought refuge in the fortress of Hub after being pursued by Najm ad-Din. Najm ad-Din Ilghazi returned to Aleppo, whilst his men on their way back encountered the ruler of Zardana, Robert the Leper, who was accompanied by a force of Crusaders. Al-Ghazi's troops attacked them, which forced those Crusaders who survived to go back to the fortress of Hub. Robert the Leper fell into the hands of the Muslims, who took their captive to Al-Ghazi in Aleppo, who in turn sent him to Toghtagin in Damascus, where he was killed in captivity. At the end of Jamadul Awwal, 513 Hijri, that is 1119 Common Era, Al-Ghazi left Aleppo and went back to Mardin because of financial difficulties that he was facing, in addition to the fact that Aleppo was in a weak position which made him unable to stay there. The Siege of Antioch and the Truce with the King of Jerusalem. Despite the fact that Najm ad-Din Ilghazi was occupied with administrative matters in Mardin, He gathered an army of Turkmens and crossed the Euphrates with them to Syria in 514 Hijri, that is 1120 Common Era, where he met Toqtagin. They went to Antioch, which they besieged but were unable to conquer. They then went to Kinasarine, which they besieged for a day and a night, but they did not get anything from that either. Zahir ad-Din Toqtagin suggested to his companion that they should lift the siege and each go back to his own land. Najm ad-Din Ilghazi accepted his advice and returned to Aleppo, after realizing the strength that the Crusaders had, whilst his Turkmen troops dispersed. Al-Ghazi had no choice but to enter a truce with the king of Jerusalem, Baldwin II, according to which the Crusaders would take Al-Ma'arah, Kafurtab, Al-Barrah, and some villages in Jabal as-Sumaq, and this truce would last until the end of the year. The truce is broken. The Crusaders did not adhere to this truce. In 514 Hijri, that is 1120 Common Era, Jocelyn, the ruler of Turbasal, raided some land that belonged to Aleppo, which forced the people of Aleppo to send a strongly worded protest to Baldwin II, king of Jerusalem, telling him of Jocelyn's aggression against the Muslims. He responded by saying, "I have no control over Jocelyn." The Crusaders did not stop there. The Crusaders in Antioch also raided the city of Shaizar and captured a number of Muslims and made unreasonable demands of the Arab emir of Shaizar, Abul Asakir Sultan ibn Munqidh, which forced him to make a peace deal with them in return for tribute. In addition to that, the Crusaders took advantage of Al-Ghazi's absence from Aleppo and launched an attack on Al-Atarib in Safar 515 Hijri, that is 1121 Common Era, burning its houses and crops, and even attacked Aleppo itself. Baldwin II laid siege to it, which resulted in 50 of its people being taken captive, but the Aleppans succeeded in rescuing their brethren and forcing the Crusaders to retreat to Antioch. It appears that Najm ad-Din Ilghazi was forced to stay in Mardin for some time. This led him to write to his son Sulayman, who was his representative in Aleppo, telling him to make a truce with the Crusaders, as a result of which the Crusaders acquired Sarmin, Baldat Laylun, some agricultural land around Aleppo, and Al-Atarib. Rebellion of Sulayman ibn Ilghazi against his father. The peace deal that Sulayman ibn Ilghazi made with the Crusaders was not in the Muslims' interests. Moreover, he did not try to deal with the disorder and chaos that prevailed in Aleppo, and instead, he openly rebelled against his father and declared Aleppo's independence. This step taken by Sulayman encouraged the Crusaders to put pressure on Aleppo and capture some of the surrounding area in Jamadi Sani, 515 Hijri, that is 1121 Common Era, and to demand that its ruler, Sulayman, surrender Al-Atarib to King Baldwin. However, the Muslim inhabitants of Al-Atarib refused to give in to the Crusaders, which forced Baldwin to retreat to Antioch and thence to Jerusalem. Suppression of the rebellion. As soon as Najm ad-Din Ilghazi heard of his son's insubordination in Aleppo, he came quickly and punished those who were behind his son's disobedience. When Sulayman saw the severe punishment that befell his supporters, he feared for his life and fled to Damascus, where he asked Toqtagin for asylum. Once Al-Ghazi had suppressed the rebellion in Aleppo, he put his nephew Badr ad-Dawla Sulayman ibn Abdul Jabbar ibn Artuk in charge of the city and formed a new truce with the Crusaders for a whole year. Al-Ghazi's aim in forming this truce with the Crusaders was to get enough time to go back to Diyarbakir and gather as many troops as possible so that he could return to fight the Crusaders, in addition to the fact that he feared the Crusaders might attack Aleppo and his nephew might not be able to offer any resistance. In Mardin, Najm ibn Ilghazi managed to gather a large number of Turkmens. Then he took them to Syria in Rabi'u Sani, 516 Hijri, that is 1122 Common Era, taking advantage of the split that occurred between Baldwin, king of Jerusalem, and Pons of Tripoli. Najm ibn Ilghazi was unable to achieve a decisive victory over the Crusaders, despite the fact that he was joined by Balak ibn Bahram ibn Artuk and Dahir ad-Deen Tughtagin, but the Crusaders were unable to spread their influence and domination to Aleppo either. The death of Ilghazi and its effect on the Muslims. In Ramadan 516 Hijri, that is 1122's Common Era, Ilghazi felt that his health was deteriorating. So he went back to Mayfariqin, Silvan in Turkey, where he died. A great loss, as the death of Najm ibn Ilghazi was for the Muslims in Syria and Mesopotamia in general. The calamity was greater for the people of Aleppo, who were very saddened by his death, because Najm ibn Ilghazi had dashed the Crusader leaders' hopes of capturing the city. The impact of Ilghazi's death went further. It led to the disintegration of his emirate as it was divided among his sons, Hussam ad-Din Tumurtash, who got Mardin, and Sulayman, who got Mayfariqin. Aleppo remained the share of his nephew Sulayman ibn Abd al-Jabbar ibn Artuk, and Balak ibn Bahram ibn Artuk kept the citadel of Kharbard, that is Khartabat, to which Haran was added later on. In addition to that, Aleppo, which used to rely on the Turkmen troops who were mobilized by Ilghazi from northern Mesopotamia, lost this resource which had often tipped the balance in favor of the Muslims against the Crusaders at the time of Ilghazi. This made Aleppo more vulnerable to Crusader raids and weakened the position of its ruler Sulayman ibn Abd al-Jabbar, which made him unable to ward off the Crusaders. These latter took advantage of Ilghazi's death to raid Baza'ah and Balis on the Euphrates, led by Baldwin II, king of Jerusalem. The matter did not end there. However, the Crusader king managed to capture the citadel of Bira, that is Al-Birah, as a result of which Aleppo was now surrounded on all sides, forcing Sulayman ibn Abd al-Jabbar to make a peace deal with the Crusaders in 517 Hijri, that is 1123 Common Era, in which he ceded the fortress of Al-Atarib. End of Part 5 of Chapter 3.